As settlement continued in the Great Lakes region, the United States government stepped up its assault on Ojibwe people with the passage of the Civilization Fund Act of 1819.
Language always represented the people, and so one of the ways that they wanted to blend them in is that, and they saw that as one of the main obstacles of civilization, of civilizing the Indian people. And so you had to get rid of the culture and the language. And so that was targeted right off the bat.
In 1887, the government directive came down through the education system.
Your attention is called to the regulation of this office, which forbids instruction in schools in any Indian language. The education of Indians in the vernacular is not only of no use to them, but is detrimental to their education and civilization.
The purpose of the boarding schools was to assimilate Indian children, and the assimilation process would eliminate the Indian problem in this country. Indians would not exist anymore.
Our language was targeted for extermination through the government and mission boarding schools. Ojibwe children were punished severely for using their language.
Many children didn't speak English at all when they got to boarding school, but English was the only language that was allowed.
No give us a gabang, me yeshkawab, mangi drangyo, and the make kuna equig, a she oad, Gimakadeo, anyone who be skag and anyone. Kanman we are seeming Posana, and the make kuna equig. Ishe gange minister to us or ananig, Nitamio, Taki Kandaman. Speak English. Speak English. Ashna gesti angangi kanazim English. Ingi papakatel gumen.
Children were disciplined very strongly with a strap at one school that I have heard about. Some schools had, if you can believe it, cells or dungeons where a child would be locked for like solitary confinement, removal from your peers, and then kept there for a while to think about what they had done.
Well, some of the kids that were sent there, from kindergarten on, they stayed there until they finished that school. So they stayed there year round. They lost everything. One of the fortunate ones that was fortunate enough to come home every summer. My grandmother, she couldn't speak any English. We tried to talk the English language like we learned at school. And that lady would say, Kahawid, bigi chumukumano isin, chi inuyan ni inuyan. Chumukumano bugi minaw guinawajin, kitaya gayegi ni ge inuyan, mi inuyan.
Speaking your language, I guess the people running the school, the people who were disciplining the children, didn't think of it as just speaking your language. I suppose they thought of it as just rebellion. And perhaps it was.
A lot of the children were beaten or speaking their language in these boarding schools. And I think that when they came back home, they remembered those teachings very well. And they didn't want their children beaten. So they tended not to teach them the traditional language if they didn't know it. They kept them away from those kinds of things because they didn't want to, all Ojibwe people just love their children, okay? And they just don't want to seem hurt.
Perhaps if some of our elders did not pass the language or maybe some of the ways on to us, I think that they took a good look at what their own experience had been. And we respect our elders for the wisdom that they have gained through their experience. And I would never question why an elder did not try to teach us to speak our own language or to speak it to us much so that we could learn it naturally. There was such heartbreak associated with school and education. And with what had happened to them as they were getting this Indianness kind of bled out of them, that, you know, all I can do is just feel the compassion that I have for all that they did for us in keeping, you know, what they did.
Besides the prohibition of our language and the boarding school indoctrination of our children, the government passed measures such as the laws for Indian courts, which outlawed many aspects of our traditional culture and spiritual practices. The Anishinaabe language and our spiritual ways went underground. For over 100 years, Ojibwe men and women could be jailed for speaking their language and conducting ceremonies. Several generations passed with families speaking mostly English. Anishinaabe communities have lost many of their fluent speakers. On the Bauman continuum of language viability, Anishinaabe-Moan is listed as an endangered indigenous language.
Our language is in structure, is made up of prefixes. Then there are your core or your root words. Then there are the suffixes. For example, the word to run to is patto. There are at least 150 prefixes can be affixed to that core word. And so that there are 150 different ways of running. Then there's another word for running from.